Now we're starting a little earlier this morning. We know some classes let out at 10:30, so other classes are going to be joining us. And for that reason, I'm just warning everybody who's leaving the center open that we're going to have more people coming. So either you might want to move over or move to the front so that when the other classes come in, there will be plenty of room for them and you won't feel disrupted. I know everybody likes to sit on the aisle. You know, I always get aisle seats on airplanes, and I just hate it when I get a middle seat. So, but thank you for doing that. Well, this is such a wonderful occasion, and I can't wait to hear this discussion. My friends, Harry, Jaffe, and Tom Sherwood are here, and my favorite colleague, Dowan McNair-Lee, whose whole idea this was. Now, where are Dowan's students? Where are the students in our class? Okay, and there's more coming in. Okay, you know, it's hard to get up on mornings like this. You know, students kept emailing me last night, are we going to be in school tomorrow? Yes, do your homework. Dowan, many of you may know this already, but Dowan joined us last year after a very successful career with the DC Public Schools. And among many achievements, at the pinnacle of her career, she won the Howard Rubenstein Award for Highly Effective Teaching in 2013. So she is one of DC's most And I just want to quote you so you know who she is. She said when she received the Rubenstein Award, "I am a teacher mama. I believe that teaching is both an art and a science. The artist in me sees the classroom as a stage where I use my own life and experiences as guides to help my students acquire knowledge. The scientist in me uses data to track student progress and make adjustments to my instruction." How lucky we are that she has chosen Trinity for this part of her career. Thank you, Dowan. And when Dowan told me recently that she was using Dream City for her freshman class in critical reading skills, I thought, how wonderful, how brilliant, what a great choice. And I love this book. I read it 20 years ago when it first came out. As someone who's lived in Washington now for 45 years, it just says everything that I think needs to be known about our city. And it happened that shortly after that conversation, we were together at a luncheon downtown. I saw Harry, Jaffe, and Tom Sherwood, and I said, "Trinity's using your book." And they said, "Invite us to come." So, you know, as luck would have it, the sun, the moon, and the stars. Harry Jaffe is the national editor of Washingtonian magazine, originally from Philadelphia?
Correct.
Me too. There's a lot of Philadelphians here. And he is just an extraordinary journalist, and I'm so proud to know him and so glad he's here. And Tom Sherwood may be a familiar face to you. He's on Channel 4 every night on the news. He's an award-winning journalist also, and he has covered city government for practically all of our lives. And he has a lot of insights into what's going on in our city, right? Well, it's just like 10 or 12 years for most of us, most of our lives. So we agreed this is going to be a little talk show format. I'm going to ask Tom to open, and then Harry, and you gentlemen can dialogue. And then Dowan is going to lead the audience interaction part, starting with her students. We're going to have a lot of dialogue, Q&A, so get your questions lined up. Tom, take it away.
Okay, thank you very much, Madam President. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here. Thank you to those who are here only because your professor makes you be here. I'm very nervous about being here today. This is the second day in a row I've been at kind of a religious-style institution. Yesterday I was at the Washington National Cathedral where they were doing the earthquake repair. And now I'm here at Trinity with all the... So I'm very nervous. You know, I don't know what God's plan is. But, you know, I remember my sister-in-law once had a flat tire, and she said, "Tom, that's God telling me to slow down." I said, "Maybe he's telling you to buy better tires." So I'm a little nervous here, but we'll get past that part. You know, this city is extraordinary. It's going through an extraordinary growth, and you're all part of it. How many are actually from the District of Columbia? And of course, we all probably mostly live in the area. Amazing transformation. Population growth, 100,000 more people than there were here 15 years ago. Gentrification, business development. How many people have been to the Monroe Street Market? We're so popular now that we can take shipping crates and turn them into apartments and sell it. It's an amazing part, an amazing point in our history of this region, and you're a part of it. Dream City tells you how we got here and why it's important to you and what this city as the nation capital means. And I hope you'll have questions today. You can ask. Here's the nice thing about being in America. You can ask Harry or me or the president or your professor anything you want, anything you have the nerve to ask. We'll decide whether we answer. This is an amazing city. From the racist segregationists who ran this city from out of the South and in Congress for X number of years, to amazing visionaries of leadership who changed the city, to corrupt politicians, some past, some maybe current and future, and the long-suffering people here. Because the fact of the matter is the nation's capital, this city, is the most un-American place in America. Because we're treated differently than the rest of America in the states of this country. I'm going to just take a quick vote. How many people want to go to war in Iraq again? You say yes or say no. Raise your hand if you want to know. You want to go to war in Iraq?
No.
No.
Raise your hand if you don't want to go to war in Iraq. I'm sorry you don't get a vote. In this city, the Congress decides whether or not we go to war in Iraq or anywhere else, and the people of this city don't get a vote. So you don't get a vote. If you're for or against abortion, you don't get a vote in Congress whether that's going to be the law of the land. Whether or not marijuana is legal, the citizens of the city voted overwhelmingly to make marijuana legal in this city, possession of marijuana. It's supposed to go into effect next Friday, a week from today. But Congress might stop it. We don't get a vote in what Congress does. So today I want you to be thinking about the city that you live in now, that's changing before our eyes, and think about how Dream City tells you the long path of how we got here. And then we can all talk about where you guys are going. Harry?
Like he said, I'm the writer. Tom is much better at talking, communicating, and whatnot. So I'm going to do the best I can from my lowly point of view here. I'm just thankful that you all are still interested in Dream City. It surprises me. We recorded and wrote the book more than 20 years ago, and the fact that it's still relevant, I'm just amazed every single day. It's a testament to how important those times were, how important the birth of our political network is in Washington, D.C., because it's very young. It started off when we had a limited home rule in 1974. In places like Philadelphia, where I come from, it's been a couple hundred years. I'm also just kind of amazed at how this city organically changes over time, and we are in one of those changes right now. I see it from a very personal point of view. I am a native of Philadelphia, but my daughters are native Washingtonians. They went to public school here, and they went to college, and now they're living with me again. And I'm watching the city through their eyes, because they're in their 20s and doing the things that I did when I was in my 20s. It just amazes me how the city is kind of organically changing again and becoming a new city, and how we all kind of integrate with the new city and deal with the new city is something that I'm kind of pleased to talk about today and hear from you as well. Otherwise, I'm just happy to be here and happy to be talking to you about a book.
Great. Now I'm going to turn this over to Dowan, and the first part of the dialogue is with Dowan and her students.
So good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Thank you all so much for coming out and supporting this venture.
Thank you, President McGuire, for the lovely introduction. I didn't think you were going to pull that out, but I appreciate that. As you heard, I am a veteran DC public schools teacher. In my heart, I will always be a middle school teacher. But I'm also a lifelong Washingtonian. I was born at the Columbia Hospitals for Women in Georgetown, which no longer exists.
Two of my daughters born there as well.
Oh, cool.
It's now a condo.
It is. And both of my parents graduated from DC public schools. So I'm definitely a Washingtonian through and through. So when I had the opportunity to read Dream City last year, just kind of, I read the City Paper article, that was the oral history, because of the 20th anniversary. So reading that, I was like, I have to get this book. And I think I read the book in either a day or two. My other connection is that my husband is one of those NYLI folks, one of those Marion-Barry youth leadership people who just, lives and dies by Marion-Barry. So as I was flipping pages, I'm like, did this really happen? Did this happen? And he was verifying or not verifying or railing against certain things, whatever. So it was great to have someone in my house that I could kind of counterpoint with some of the issues in the text. But I brought it to the students here at Trinity because I thought that as students here at the school in the district, it would be very, very important for them to understand the history of the city where they're getting their education. And we take it for granted that a lot of our students are from the city and born and raised here. But I think a lot of our other students are coming from different places. And even if you were born and raised just like I was, the book brought up a lot of issues that I quite frankly didn't know. And I thought it was important. And then when we're talking about critical reading, this text is very, very instructive in that regard because they have the perspective of a journalist and also the perspective of a writer. And they get to look at those kind of perspectives, and then the fact that Marion-Barry published an autobiography not too shortly after the book was released, we can kind of look at both texts and kind of do some comparison and fact-checking and just looking at how the same incident is told from different points of view. So those are some of the things that we're doing in our class this semester, and using Dream City and the history of Washington, D.C. as our anchor for it. So with that being said, I have a couple of questions.
You know, I like to ask the question.
Not this time. I have a real funny anecdote, real quick, about Mr. Sherwood. You're sure you don't remember this, but years ago, I was teaching third grade. That didn't go too well. But anyway, I was a third grade teacher at one point in my life. And one of my parents was the wife of Anthony Williams' chief of staff at the time. So as a field trip to third grade, because we were studying DC history, they invited us all down to the Wilson building. These cute little third graders. And they're like, oh, you get to sit in on a press conference. And that day, I don't know what happened in the city, but all the journalists in the room were itching to get at the mayor. I mean, it was like fire in the room. And I remember walking past Mr. Sherwood, and he said, they bring these cute kids in here this day when we need to ask some real questions.
That was Tom's soft side.
It didn't stop us either.
No, but what the funniest part was that, they told us to have a couple of questions prepared for our students. So really adorable little 8-year-olds are standing up asking these questions. And then as the students started asking more and more questions, their questions started getting harder and more. And the journalists in the room started saying, wait a minute, we were going to ask that question. And I just remember that, but I thought it was really funny when I heard you actually say, these kids want to ruin this press conference, really get some hard and stuff. And it turned out that the kids actually were the ones that got some of those questions answered. So, great memory. Anyway, one of the foci here at Trinity has been lessons from Ferguson. We've been talking a lot about how we can use the incident of Ferguson and other police-involved murders to talk about social justice. And I couldn't help but to draw parallels between the Michael Brown incident and other police-involved murders and the murder of Clarence Booker that occurred in 1967, that you all know, I think is chapter 3 of Dream City. So one of the things that kind of intrigued me was that this murder, this police-involved murder that happened in 1967, kind of galvanized this political effort that while socially, I think we've seen a lot of protests, we've seen a lot of things now, but there has not been like this singular political movement that happened like in 1967 with Pride and then with kind of the home rule and all of that. So what was it about Marion Barry and DC at that time that made it so ripe for that incident to kind of spur this kind of radical change in the city?
Well, the short answer is that the city underwent a radical change with Marion Barry when he arrived in town with the veterans of the Civil Rights Movement of the 60s and started challenging the status quo. Washington is a very bureaucratic town. Because people go along and get along, they get government jobs, they're in the system. And Barry and a group of friends challenged the status quo on many different levels. And Barry started, the book itself starts about Barry confronting the police department right away. I mean, we've had a number, we have not, fortunately, had some of the horrific things like Ferguson. But you know, back in a decade ago, Kathy Patterson, as a council member from Ward 3, the wealthy white section of the city at the time, it's kind of spread ward, but she did a big study of the police department here and how it treated protesters, and there was a massive change in the way that the police department started dealing with people publicly and in groups. We have so many demonstrations here. So, but Barry helped start that. Just last April, a year ago, I had to sit down with Barry and I showed him pictures of himself as a young man on the streets challenging the police. And he laughed. It's a great video. I think it's still on our website, NBCWashington.com. But it shows Barry, he said, the police, and I asked him, out of all your career, Mr. Mayor, what would you have done differently? And he said he would have focused on the police earlier. This was April last year. He said he would have made a bigger effort to make the police part of the community that they serve.
I think the short answer to the question is Marion Barry and his, in a way, his assessment of Washington, D.C. and his desire and his aim to become a leader and a powerful political force in Washington. I was amazed. I don't know whether amazed is the word. I was surprised and impressed at a document that I found in the Library of Congress when I was researching Dream City. Marion was a leader in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, which was kind of a very militant part of the Civil Rights Movement. Stokely Carmichael and John Lewis was part of it as well. And so I think I researched SNCC, and I came up with a report, almost like a college research paper, written by Marion Barry in 1965 or 6. It was typewritten and with a manual typewriter, perfectly done, carbon copies, the whole thing. And what it was an assessment of the power structure of Washington, D.C. at that time. And he was a brilliant man. And his assessment, back to his SNCC leaders, was that this was a city that was run by a white power structure, political power in Congress, and financial power in at that point it was the Board of Trade and the Chamber of Commerce, mostly the Board of Trade, and a political system that really ignored certainly the less fortunate and the poor black folks, but did have a place for middle-class African Americans. But what he said was, there's a huge opportunity here. And the way he kind of laid it out, almost like it was almost like arithmetic. This is what it is, this is what we have to do. And from that point on, he looked for opportunities. I mean, he's Marion described himself as a situationist. But he was really, quite an opportunist, which, if you're a politician, like it or not, you got to be an opportunist. And so he saw, for instance, his creation of Free DC was part and parcel to that. His Pride Inc., which was his job organization, was a perfect example of his taking advantage of a federal government that wanted to, bestow money on local job programs because there was high unemployment, and Marion created Pride Inc. When he saw that murder, he said, aha, here's another opportunity for me to take control of this situation, highlight the fact that we have a lot of white cops who are pushing around poor black people, and he made it into a cause célèbre of the day. And it was all because he was, he was politically brilliant, and he knew how to, take advantage of situations and shed light on them. Just as, it is analogous to Ferguson, but just at a different time and a different way.
Thank you so much. One other question before I turn it over to the students. I know that last year you all published a re-release of the book with kind of a second epilogue, if you will. What most surprised you about DC in the 20-year span from the original publishing until 2014? What kind of stuck out to you as like the thing that you were just most surprised about the city changing?
I don't think there's any doubt that the biggest change is the economic revival of the city. When Mayor Tony Williams and the Control Board in the late 90s were in charge of the city. The Control Board, I did not like it. I thought people should have their own elected representatives. But the Control Board did something good, The Congress took away a lot of our pension debts and other things and made us financially much more viable. Mayor Williams, when he was elected at first, he said, I want to start a program, I want to grow the city by 100,000 people over the next 10 years. A lot of people laughed. And in this city, along with other urban areas, the back to their city movement that's occurring, which is pushing some people out as others come in. The dramatic change in the city is undeniably the most surprising, the most extensive, and the most, in some cases, scary thing that's happening in Washington that has happened in the last 20 years.
I would agree. I'm flabbergasted by the changes in the city. If I drive, I lived in Chevy Chase, DC, where I brought up my family. I now live in Woodland Circle. As I drive east into the neighborhoods like Bloomingdale and Edmonton, and I see white folks pushing carriages, I say, do you know where you are? Because it's, for me, these were solid African-American neighborhoods, and I'm just shocked at how quickly things are changing in the city. I would say that is one of the biggest changes. I would say that the governments, Tony Williams being the first one, and then Fenty as well, there was a change in the way the city was governed. There was an emphasis on management, an emphasis on public service actually functioning, and the city government began to function better, not beautifully, but better. And
name a government that functions beautifully.
I think the DMV in Washington, D.C. You get your license and you can do a lot of stuff in the mail now and on the computer that you couldn't do before. Anyway, and then Adrian Fenty taking over the schools. For better or for worse, it focused attention on education. One of my main criticisms of Marion Barry over the years is that he didn't do anything for the schools. And he let the schools just flounder and become really decrepit. The buildings and the curriculum itself. And Marion could always say, that's the school board's problem. I don't really run the schools. And he was right, because there was a functioning school board. But it took Adrian Fenty, who went to school in Washington, D.C., to basically say, that's not working anymore. That is just not functioning. Our children are not getting educated. And this got to change. And so he wiped away the school board and took control of the schools. Whether that has been better or worse, whether that's actually improved the schools is a matter of place and taste. But his at least focusing that much attention on education, public education in Washington, D.C. was one of the biggest changes over the last 20 years.
Thank you so much. So we're going to open up the student question section, and I do have one student by name that I want to start off the questioning, and then after that we'll just kind of open it up. So Michelle Wood, if you could start off the questioning, thank you.
Are they coming to the microphone?
There's a microphone for you to use there.
I'm sorry, I'm in television. You have to come to the microphone and you have to speak up. Now, thank you for coming.
Tell us your name.
I'm Sherwood. Mr. Sherwood, these questions are for you.
Wait, so what do I get right to?
It's coming. My first question was, Barry was well known for knowing the city's budgets. What were 2 or 3 other admirable qualities that you would say?
Did you hear the question? Barry was well known for understanding the city budget. And what were the other admirable qualities? You used the word admirable, right? There are other qualities. All right. One of the things was despite what Harry said about schools, I could argue that for a moment, but I won't. One of the things he did was the summer jobs program that was mentioned earlier. It was not always run well, but something that runs poorly is better than something that runs not at all. And the schools were the summer jobs program was very important to Barry. He said anyone 14 to 21 could have a job in the summer, at least 7 weeks. These are good. Oh, I'm sorry. I have such a big voice that it doesn't make a difference. Thank you. Microphones actually make me nervous even on TV. So summer job is, I think, a universally agreed upon thing that Marion Barry did. He provided opportunity for, not just for people to get a little money in their pockets, but for them to see the working world, whether they were in a government office building or a university or a private office somewhere. Young students had to come to work on time, they had to dress appropriately on time to come to work. And so they learned something about the work world which they were going to enter. That's one thing. Another thing that Marion Barry did is he looked about and said that the city was not doing nearly enough for the senior citizens in the twilight of life. And he provided money, and not always well-spent money, but he provided money in new places for senior citizens, for your grandmothers and great-grandmothers and fathers and mothers to go and live at the end of their lives. And he provided that they had a place to live and food to eat. And so those are 2 things he did that helped people at the core of their being, so in addition to knowing how the city budget worked. And I could probably think of a couple more, but I'll leave it at those 2 because I like those.
I have 3. Not out to Tom, but so
3
first,
additional ones?
No, yeah, 3 totally additional ones. The 3 that you forgot and left down. You can't look beyond the fact that Marion Barry opened the DC government to black people. It was run by Caucasians. And the first thing he did was to break open the doors and give African Americans a chance to run their own city. The second thing he did was he opened up the government to women. If you look back over his appointees over the many years that he was mayor, because it was 16, he gave women a chance to lead. He appointed them to high office in his own executive suites and to run city agencies. And I'd say the third thing, and it's not very well recalled or thought of, is that Marion could make a deal. And making a deal is not a small thing if you're running a city. And so in the late 80s, middle 80s, late 80s, Washington, D.C. downtown became a monopoly board for investors worldwide. It had been a sleepy southern town with kind of boxy buildings that housed lawyers and accountants and advocacy agencies, and all of a sudden it became valuable property. And there was a boom and a run on DC buildings, DC property, and Marion understood that he should encourage that because the new commercial office buildings were going to bump up the tax revenues and fatten up the coffers of the DC government and allow him to create more jobs in the government and to create more programs for the people. Whether those programs worked and whether he trained those people is something else entirely. But he did that. He understood that essential transaction. He could make a deal. I will leave you with the Washington Redskins and where they are right now. They are not in Washington, D.C. They're in, is it Lanham?
Raljon.
Raljon. They're in Prince George's County, and the reason they're there is because Sharon Pratt Kelly was mayor when Jack Kent Cooke, the owner of the Redskins, said, RFK's not working out for me anymore, I need a new stadium. And they just didn't get along. She was kind of like, what are you, you're just a billionaire bully, she called him, which he was. And he didn't really get along with her, and they couldn't figure out, how to keep the Redskins in Washington, D.C., and therefore they moved to the suburbs. I guarantee you that if Marion Barry had been mayor, the Redskins would be playing football in Washington, D.C. If he could have picked a different owner, maybe. Anyway, I think that Marion was brilliant in many ways in how he governed. But he certainly gave women opportunities. He was a deal maker, and he really understood the budget as well.
And Michelle, thank you for the question. I knew all those things. I didn't forget them. I just didn't want to talk as long. And Harry and I are friendly, but we had different views on this city and this book. Like, for example, if you notice, he's calling Mayor Barry Marion, as if they were buddies. And I always call him Mayor Barry. It's a distinction, I think, with merit, because it shows a different level of respect or irritation for some people. And that's just one little thing you notice in the conversation of how people say and do things. We have different views of all these things. And so we'll be polite, though.
It's kind of a southern politeness that is about this deep. And I called the mayor, his honor, mayor for life, Marion. We were not buddies. As a matter of fact, one of the questions we're often asked is, how much did you talk to the mayor when you were writing this book, researching the book? And the answer is not at all.
It's not official. We didn't sit down and have an interview situation, because I talked to him virtually every day over many years, and that's what helped inform the book. But he didn't want to be interviewed for Dream City. He wanted to write his own book. It took him quite a few years to do it, and it's certainly a different book, but he did do a different thing. Did you have another question?
I did.
Okay, thank you. Speak up.
What you just said, because you didn't know him for a long time. Prior to reading the book, we read the oral history of Dream City from the Washington City paper. In the article, Barry expressed his displeasure with you, with his involvement with the book. And I just want to know, did you all ever speak after he told you to never contact him again?
Oh, yes. Marion Barry was not mad so much at me. Last spring, when our book was, a new version was coming out, and he was on the radio, those two white guys don't know what's going on in my life. I'm going to tell my life. You may have heard it on the radio. Well, at that same time as that was going on, I was going to various private gatherings in the city at which Marion Barry was present. And even to this day, right now, I'm working on an oral history of the 1978 campaign for mayor with all the people who worked in his original campaign in 1978. And we're working with George Washington University, if I may say another school. But Barry, as Harry mentioned, a situationist. He would decide what he needed to do at the time he needed to do something. And at the time, he was angry that one, our book was coming out again, and in over 20 years he never corrected anything in it. But he was also angry that HBO is planning to do a movie with Spike Lee as a director and Eddie Murphy playing Barry. And that HBO paid Harry and I a little bit of money for the rights to use our book to tell Marion Barry's story. And they didn't pay him a dime for any of his life. And so I would have been mad too. But Barry and I, our sons are equal, close ages. My son's 36, his is 33. Marion Christopher Barry, who's running for the Ward 8 council seat. And so Barry and I had a good relationship. We talked about all kinds of things all the time. And so when he would lambaste me in public and say horrible things, I just smiled.
I think that the fact that Tom and the mayor were so close, and that the mayor and I were so distant, made a perfect kind of collaboration for the book. It really did, because I had perspective, and Tom had real understanding and proximity, and between the two of us, we tried to come out in the middle sometimes.
Thank you very much for your question. And I will take this one moment, because you will hear Harry and I disagree, but I will not disagree on one thing. This book would not have happened without Harry. Right after Barry was arrested, Harry had contacts in New York and the book agent who wanted him to write a book about Marion Barry because Barry had been arrested, and most people thought Barry's career was over in 1990. And Harry, to his credit and to mine, said, well, I can write this book, but I need somebody who knows a little bit more about the ends of the city. And so he called me up. And while we'd known each other for a long time, we were not personal friends. That can be questioned to this day. But Harry called and said, well, do you want to do a book about Marion Barry? And I said, yes. And it was back at his insistence, his idea, his insistence, and his hard work for 4 years to do a book. I know that reading is an important thing in all the work that you're doing, and just to be able to read all the I had file cases of documents. I had me and other reporters from the Post that kept on Marion Barry. We had to read all those documents. Harry's a great writer.
Okay, that's
no. He is a good writer. If you read his articles, he has a very good writing style. The book shows that. I just talk more. That's why I'm in television. But it's important that all the stuff that we had to read and to get together and take all the information we have and scrunch it down to the book. I do honestly and sincerely, as much as I might say negatively about Harry when I'm going forward, that's what he did.
Thanks, Tom.
Do any other students have questions? This would be a great time where I'll start pulling out your homework and start reading your questions from there. So if any other students, either from my classes or any other classes, have questions, the microphone is available.
And please do ask the question. If you don't have any, I have some you could ask Harry.
Questions now? Come on, don't be shy.
If you don't, I'm going to ask questions of you.
Oh, yeah.
Then I'm going to, I don't know if the student is here. Is Jaquan here? Jaquan.
Called out.
If you could come to the microphone, please. See, I told you I'm still a middle school teacher. Jaquan asked, did you ever experience any threats from Barry supporters when you were writing the book? And I just wanted Jaquan to make a face connection with Jaquan. But I thought that was an excellent question that she asked.
Okay, now she can ask it.
Have you ever experienced threats from Smith or Pride as you were writing the book?
No, we have not. As I mentioned, I'm working on this oral history about the 1978 campaign now. But I think one of the prides for me in this book is that over the 20-year period that it came out, and even now since it came out with a new edition last April, no one has come to us and said, you got that wrong. Correct that in the next edition. I think one mistake that we did make, which I'm embarrassed to say, is we wrote that Massachusetts Avenue ended at the Anacostia River and didn't jump the river. The minor little detail. But no, not really. You can have angry disagreements with people. They don't have to be fights. The mayor and I disagreed on a number of things at different times, but we never were enemies. As I tell people, I'm friendly with most everyone, but I'm basically friends with no one because of my job as a journalist, if you're in my world of what I cover. And the people from the civil rights days to this very day, we have honest, earnest conversations. And that's what you should do in your own life. If you don't like somebody or you don't like what they're doing, that doesn't mean they're your enemy. And so none of the people I dealt with are angry. They're more angry at Harry for a variety of reasons, but not me.
The short answer is no. There was no hostility and no threats, and I think that was for a couple of reasons. One, I don't think that Dream City is negative or hostile or disparaging. I think that Tom and I tried to just tell the story as we heard it and put people in an accurate light as opposed to a bad light. And then I think that you also have to think back 20 years to when we reported the book. Let's think about that for a second. It was 1990, 91 and 92, a little bit of 93. There was a couple years of reporting and a lot of writing, but at that time, Marion was not mayor. Marion, as Tom said, was thought to be kind of, he had just been busted at the Vista Hotel for smoking crack cocaine. He had been jailed, and he was not mayor, and kind of out of the picture. And so there was a window for people to talk to us about him. And I think that we were just fortunate that at that time, people were able to talk about their recollections, their disappointments, and so we were fortunate to be reporting the story at that moment.
It was a short window, as Harry said, because Mayor Barry, after he came out of prison, he later ran at 92 for the D.C. Council from Ward 8. And then, of course, ran for mayor again in 94. And some people who talked to us quite honestly and openly were a bit unnerved that they thought they had talked about a politician whose career was over, and here he was again in the mayor's office. But there was really no repercussion of all that, because again, through the hard work of making sure that what we were writing was as accurately as we could humanly possibly make it, we have not had a great pushback on either the tone of the book or the facts of the book. Thank you for asking that question.
Thank you for answering my question.
I'm sorry you had to be called up by the professor.
So there were a couple of I would say, critical things about the mayor that might have been construed as critical, but they were honest. Rufus Catfish Mayfield, when they established Pride Inc. Remember, these are young men in their 20s. The mayor had just come to Washington. He was new. He didn't know a thing about cities, northern cities, mid-Atlantic cities. I mean, the biggest city he really knew was Memphis. It was Rufus Catfish Mayfield, who was the native Washingtonian, who helped to instruct Marion Barry about the ways and the oddities of the streets of Washington, D.C. And then when it came to taking leadership of Pride Inc., Marion Barry went, and to this day, I would say Rufus, who's very well and very alive and still very active. Though he had jobs in the mayor's governments over the years, I think he's still kind of pissed off about that. You don't think so?
I was just a little shocked by the language.
Secondly, one of the most poignant moments for me in reporting and writing the book was that there were a number of African American native Washingtonians who were your age, maybe a little bit older, maybe in their late 20s, early 30s, who were working in the mayor's government. And they believed in him. They believed in the civil rights movement. They believed that black leadership was so important. And they wanted to be a part of that government. They wanted to be part of Marion Barry's government. And when they saw him gradually succumb to drug addiction, and they saw it in the flesh, in the district building, and he would come to meetings after being out all night, strung out in the morning. And that for them was just heartbreaking. That was critical. I mean, it was real, it happened, but that was painful for them. I don't think that the mayor was pained about it because he was, had other things to be pained about. But, those are some things that people divulged to us, and I think that from my perspective, I think from Tom's too, there was more of a kind of like, almost like a cathartic aspect of talking about the early days of Washington, D.C. than there was any kind of a negative or hostile reaction to us.
I want to mention one more thing Mayor Barry did that is not commonly known. I know if you go down to 14th Street now, which was a riot quarter, and you see all those 83 restaurants or whatever they are, and you go to Logan Circle and you see the multi-million-dollar townhomes, and you go up 13th Street. One thing the mayor did, which I've always liked, Logan Circle used to be for the commuters who live in Maryland and other areas. The old city government had cut roadways through the middle of Logan Circle, one of the prettiest circles in the city, and made additional lanes up 13th Street all the way north of Maryland. And then it used to be, you're all too young to know this now, but it used to be that in the morning, 13th Street was one way coming into town and one way going out. And Mayor Barry said, wait a minute, these are commuters coming from Maryland, principally. They don't pay taxes here. They don't live here. 13th Street is a place where people live, where people have retired, where children are walking the streets. I'm not going to do this one-way thing in the morning where people have to move their cars from their homes so suburbanites can come into town. He said, secondly, I'm not going to leave Logan Circle the way it was either. We're going to close those lanes, put the grass back, and let people have a place to have a park. Those are the kinds of things that he did that always get, and listen, the bad things you do in your life will leave your obituary. Right? So just, I'm not making excuses for him. I'm just saying there are so many things that Barry did that touched people. And why do people keep electing that fool? Why do they keep voting for that drug addict? Well, he did things that made a difference to the real lives of people. And if I could just, I don't want to summarize things, but I want to say the one thing that Mayor Barry did not have was discipline. This applies to your own lives. No matter how good or how bad you are, how much you think you have to overcome, or what you think you can achieve, or what you've gotten already. The one thing Mayor Barry did not have was discipline. He knew exactly, as Harry wrote when he wrote back in 1965. He knew what needed to be done, but he did not have the discipline to follow through. And just before he was arrested, I was sitting in his office, and he was going through this drawer of ties, looking for a tie to put on his shirt because he was going somewhere. And I said, Mr. Mayor, I don't understand this. You give contracts to your buddies for senior services or whatever the issues there are, and then they don't follow through. They get the money, they don't do the work, and you get the blame. And he said, oh yeah, I'm going to get tough on them. I said, no, you're not. You never have. So if he had had the discipline, just a little bit of the discipline that I've tried to instill in my son, to focus on what he was doing, not the idea, but the execution of the idea, he would have been just so much better as a mayor. He would have been like the Dailies in Chicago and other places. He would just did not have the discipline. In his early days as a civil rights person, people who were with him said even then he didn't have the discipline to stick to it. So whatever you can do, whatever you're doing, whether it's a reading class or a science class, whatever, you just try to give yourself a little discipline. It's remarkable the change you can make. And to this day, I regret that Marion Barry didn't have the kind of discipline that I thought would have made him a great leader.
I have a student question from a student who has a class right now. So this is from Brianna Alexander.
She's not in here.
She's not in here, no, so I can't embarrass her. She actually has a class now. But she did ask a question. She said, would you two of you all consider writing another book together?
Well, you know, again, I'm going to say nicely about Harry, because it's true, otherwise I wouldn't say it. We did this afterward, this very long afterward, which is that was another book. That was a huge addition. We did it on deadline. Muriel Bowser was nominated back on April 1st of last year. And again, to Harry's credit as a writer, he took all the information that we had talked about over the last 20 years and things we've done, and crunched it into an afterword for our book. And I don't know that there's another book to be done. I mean, I'm now ready to retire, actually. I'm all set to retire. I just got to figure out what I'm going to do in retirement. But I think I'll just... You know, I'm not a college graduate, so I'm not sure you have even I'm not sure I even qualify for adjunct professor. But it's, I don't know that there's another book to be done, but I would like the folks in the room to help set the pace for what would be a book, by what you do for your city, for your voting rights, for your right to govern yourselves, for your right to have affordable housing, for your right to be in a city that should welcome you and not push you out to other areas. It's a very active time. We're almost reliving some of the 1960s issues again. Income inequality, housing, policing. These things are like, for those of us who were adults in the 60s, it's kind of a flashback. And we're about to legalize marijuana, so we're going through the whole core of things. So I just think it's really important that maybe the next book is sitting out here.
Yes, I would write another book with Tom Sherwood. Surprising that may be. But, you know, we were really fortunate to be able to come to the subject of our city and Mayor Barry when we did. Marion Barry was an extraordinary character. I mean, as a writer, he was Greek tragedy material. He was Shakespearean material. I mean, the human frailties that he had were extraordinary. So, a great opportunity and a great character. I'm sorry, but the leaders who followed him in the mayor's office don't quite hit that mark, if you will. I mean, Anthony Williams, a terrific technocrat, manager. But interesting? No. Even Fenty, who he was kind of a flash and dash mayor. He came in, made decisions, pushed people around, biked around the city a lot. But depth? No. And so we lack a compelling storyline, which every book has to have. And we lack a great character. With the development in the early days of Washington, D.C. and Marion Barry, we had both.
On that point about Barry and being a Greek character, I once told him in some crisis that was going on, I said, Mr. Mayor, you're like a Greek tragedy. He said, no, I'm not. In the Greek tragedy, the hero dies, and I'm not dying.
We have a question from the audience. Say your name, please.
Come up to the microphone so we can hear you.
And use your...
I don't want to fuss at her on the microphone.
I'm pretty loud, so you don't need
But you have to talk right into it.
You want me to talk about this?
Yes.
I'm gonna talk.
When time's up, sit down.
My name is Danielle Henderson, and you spoke briefly about gentrification of the city. What are your predictions
Muriel Bowser has renamed the summer jobs program the Marion Barry Summer Jobs Program. She says she intends to make it available to the young people of the city. She's even expanded a jobs program. She just announced it a couple of weeks ago to include young people 22 to 24 to have jobs and get paid. She's raised the salary of what the young people do. Question is, will the people still be here? There is an economic gentrification that's occurring in the city. People who cannot afford to stay. When you have a one-bedroom, my son lives on Georgia Avenue around Lamont Street, and he has an efficiency apartment that's about 500 square feet. It's not very big, and he pays $1,600 a month for it. The crisis of affordable housing has been in the city for some time. The problem is, I mean, down here at Monroe Street Market, when this was announced back in November of 2011, I came for the groundbreaking. Then I came back a short time later and I saw the townhomes going up behind it, down 7th Street there. And the sign said, townhomes from the $600,000. And I was thinking, what student's going to afford that? What college professor is going to afford that? Well, maybe a college president. But, so the economic force is really powerful. And the city council, the DC council, has said, and the mayor has said, we're going to spend $100 million a year to keep affordable housing. But they're not just talking about poor people who have no money. They're talking about lower and middle income people who have no money, who can't afford to stay in the city. So whether or not, I don't see it actually at this point. They keep talking about it, but I don't see a lot of it.
Have many of you been to the Arena Stage Theater in Southwest? Right. Back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, that part of Washington, D.C. was what I guess you'd call now the ghetto. It was narrow streets, narrow alleys. Most of the poor African Americans, many poor African Americans lived there. And there was a plan put together by some developers, and I think that the publisher of the Washington Post, Phil Graham, had a part in it. And it was basically to redevelop those streets and redevelop that part of town. And if you go back there now, you'll see some nice streets and some nice apartments and whatnot. And the plan was to redevelop it and to bring the African American residents back. Well, guess what? They didn't come back. White people moved in, and that became known as urban removal, as opposed to urban renewal. And I think that that's happening across Washington, D.C. at this point. Tony Williams was known as a fine mayor who did some good things to make the city government work and balance the books and all that good stuff. His housing chief tore down a bunch of public housing in Ward 8, and those people went to Prince George's County. They never came back. So you ask yourself, why did the crime rate go down in Washington, D.C.? Why did the drug trade stop in Washington, D.C.? A lot of people just got moved out of Washington, D.C. and went to Prince George's County or Silver Spring or Wheaton or wherever. And in answer to your question, what's going to happen next? More of the same. There are economic forces that are going to, make it harder for, middle-class people of any stripe to be here, but I think it's going to hit poor African Americans the most. Which brings me to what is commonly known as the plan. It was an idea that was put forward by an African-American columnist for the Afro-American newspaper back in the 60s. And the plan was that, well, Washington is now dominated by African-Americans, and it's got an African-American government, and all is well and good, but wealthy white people have the plan to basically remove African Americans and take power and take control of the city again. Well, I don't know whether I don't believe in conspiracies, so I don't think there is the plan, but I think it's happening anyway.
Yeah, the plan, there may not be a plan, but it's working. I just want to disagree with Harry about Southwest. It was not just a poor neighborhood. It had poor sections, but Southwest along the waterfront, where there is right this moment a $2 billion redevelopment of the waterfront, was much like Capitol Hill. It had poor people, but it also had neighborhood stores, it had nice communities, it had people of all, and there was actually fairly well integrated in some cases. But the federal city council and other people said they didn't want any of the slummiest parts of the city to be overlooking the Capitol. So they decided they would wipe it all clear. I live there now. And they wipe it all clear, and they would build new, modern buildings. If you go there now, that's what is there. I lived in a building that was built in the 1960s. So
African American people live there?
Yeah, we have African American people who live there. I'll introduce you to some if you ever come. But the change in the city, to go back to your question, the change in the city, I mean, we have a lot of our middle and upper income African American community actually moved to Prince George's County. And if you look, a lot of them right now are moving to Charles County. So there's a lot of change. But this city, 15 years ago, was just at 70% African American. Now, in the latest census, it's under 50%, something like 49%. But it's a demonstrable, it is a real change. And whether the city does anything economically to stop the change, as Harry said, it's going to continue. You should be, if you live in the city, you should be active in your communities.
Can I follow up on that? I would love to follow up on that while you're thinking of other questions to ask. But I've been thinking as I've seen all of our students here, many of whom are DC residents, getting the kind of education here at Trinity that prepares future leaders. And as we talk about the shifting economics, the shifting racial demographics, all of the issues that are on the agenda for DC, I like to think that the future mayor and city council members are sitting right here today. So the question I really have, Harry and Tom, what do you think? Isn't that what we're about? So while we're concerned about the issues of displacement and you know, the changing face of the city, at the same time, you will have the education, you will have the skills, you will have the power of Trinity women to seize the moment, to get out there and get politically involved. I'd like to hear from Tom and Harry, what are the things you would say to the future leaders? How should they be preparing themselves now to get engaged? So much of the rhetoric about engagement seems a little negative, and there's so many scandals that sometimes young people don't want to be associated with it, but at the same time we have to teach what the pathways to power are. So could you talk a little bit about that and what message the students could take from this about engagement in the city in particular?
Well, don't be discouraged by the corrupt people, what happens in corruption. The governor of Oregon just resigned. He'd been governor for 3 terms. Sounded like Marion Barry to me, except Barry didn't resign. You know, it's common, it's like when I ask people to come and ask questions, and some of them are afraid to ask questions, and some of them will say, oh, there are no dumb questions. Ask your question. And the fact is, there are some dumb questions. You just have to have the nerve to ask them. I ask them all the time. Like, what's Harry doing here? But no, you have to engage. You're not a passenger on some boat going somewhere. You're in the control room of your life. It's whatever. I'm from a single mother of 4, and my mother was from the South, and Lord knows that had lots of baggage. But you know, whatever your circumstances are, whether you're going to be a leader or just a member of your community, it's actually fun to be engaged. You can say, oh, I'm sick of that. They're all corrupt. Journalists write lies. Politicians tell lies. People don't know what's going on. They don't know the real story. Well, you know what? You tell the real story. Whatever, I mean, you had to come out in this cold weather, freezing cold weather, and get here today and come in and listen to these two old white guys talk.
He's talking about himself.
I'm older than Harry, I can say that. So, I don't know, am I whiter? I don't know. Anyway, but it's really your job. It's your job to whatever books you're carrying today. I was a terrible college student. I was a freshman for 6 years. And I finally said, hell, this is not for me. So I went to work full time. So, but it's your job to decide. I decided that I was going to try to do something. And it's fun to be engaged. It's not as much fun to sit back and complain. And so that's what I would say. As I mentioned, Mayor Barry's lack of discipline, to follow through. All of us, Lord knows how many people go to the gym in January and forget where it is by February, right? It's just much easier to engage yourself, whatever it is. It may be your community right now. I once was at a meeting in Ward 8 across the river, and people were complaining there were too many, that people from Maryland were coming and dumping carloads of tires, truckloads of tires into the alley, and the city wouldn't come pick them up. I said to the people in the community meeting, I've got an idea. Let's take 10 cars, let's put all the tires in the trunks of the cars, and we'll drive down in a parade, and we'll dump them on the front lawn of the mayor's office. I said, they'll be picked up then. And they were going to do it. I thought, well, I can't cover that story because I just created it. But I said, but then they announced that we're going to do that, and the city came and got the tires. All right? You can take actions, little people together, little actions together. That's what this book's about, what people did, what Marion did. Marion, you get that? That's what all these folks did. They weren't school, they didn't go to school to learn how to organize. They said, we need to fix this. So whatever you do, that's what I would suggest. You can just change things. It's amazing. I fight with my editors all the time. I had a shouting fight with them yesterday. You don't have to worry about the details. But I threatened to bring a union suit against them if they did this thing again. You never have to be satisfied where you are. I'm paid pretty well as a TV reporter. And my son's an owner of a bar, which is great because I have a place to go when I retire. But you can always, and he's always trying to do something, start a new business, he wants to do this, he wants to do that, he comes to the Bank of Dad. I tell him, I'm too old, the Bank of Dad is closed. You're going to have to find another way to do it. But I'd ask you to engage. Think of discipline, and then engage, whatever it is, whether it's your neighborhood, your block, or just in your own home. It's a great thing to be engaged. I'm summing that up because I have to leave.
Can I break in for a second?
No. I'm just about to warm up. We're going to come do a collection. We're going to have the choir sing.
So Tom gave you the kind of the inner workings of how you might become a caring, involved leader. I'll give you a much more practical approach. Washington, D.C. is a very small town. The politics of Washington, D.C. are really, really simple. We have ANCs, Advisory Neighborhood Commissions, and if you want to kind of test the water, you can run for those offices. And by God, just by running, you often will get a seat. That'll give you some say in your neighborhood. And then, the next step is to maybe work in the government or work for a politician. The politicians in Washington who are running for city council, see if there's somebody who you like. And then volunteer to work on his or her campaign. See if you like it. I mean, politics is kind of a bug. It kind of gets in you, and you kind of have to like a lot of things. You have to walk around talking to people, shaking hands, all those things. You have to be personable. But you can test the waters in Washington, D.C. very, very easily. And I would recommend it if you have any interest at all. Just throw your hand in. We have elections every 2 years for city council. Take a look at the council people and see if you have any interest in what their issues are: environment, social justice, education. and see if you want to work for them. When they run for office, they're begging for people to work for them. And it's a free education. Of course, you're not going to get paid necessarily, but you might. So I think that there's a practical way to become a leader in Washington. It's not hard. It's not New York City. It's a small town with a much smaller group of people who are actually interested and involved in practical politics.
I want to jump in real quick there. We talk about practical politics. One of the ways that you can also do that is through social media involvement. I can think of two off the top of my head that have made a real impact in kind of city politics. One is the Prince of Petworth, and that blog has really taken off and really become one of a linchpin of where people go to find out what's happening in the city. One that is near and dear to my heart is The Advocate, and it's spelled with an 8 because she tweets and blogs about Ward 8 issues. And she is a young woman, I think she's younger than 35, and she works for the Anacostia Business District now. But she tweets about Ward 8 issues, and we all, I follow blogs. I've told my students on many occasions I'm a pop culture junkie. But blogging and microblogging in the form of Twitter and Instagram and other social media platforms are definitely a way of getting your voice heard as well. And it will allow you all to practice the skills that you're learning here and also do it in a way that's constructive for your neighborhoods, what have you. Another thing is that I know personally that there is a Trinity alum that's running for city council in Ward 8. So if you find that you're my student, Sheila Bunn, and she's running for city council in Ward 8. And Ward 4. Yes. So there are Trinity alum that are places, and I know for certain that if you use your status as an alum, then doors will open. And just your affiliation with the university, doors will open. So I've done that. I've been able to trade on who I know because I've gone to certain institutions here in the city, and it kind of worked out well for me. So, all right. So I would definitely encourage the students to look at ways that you can, right now where you stand, become involved, and have your voice heard in a unique way.
We are changing how we communicate with each other. Harry has been working with our people in New York, and they've just created the Dream City website. What's the name? Correct?
DreamCityBook.com. DreamCityBook.com.
Isn't it much better than a microphone? But and I have like 12,000 followers on Twitter, and my station has a website, and social media is the media world itself, whether it's radio, TV, newspapers, magazines. There's an explosion of outlets for the media. You can be involved in creating your own media, like the Prince of Petworth did. But the print's not going away. I was just down here at Barnes & Noble this morning. I tried to count the number of magazines. There must have been 200 different print magazine titles. If you're a left-handed woman who plays tennis only on Thursday, I think there's a magazine down there. But so we're in a revolution of how people get information from, and I've been real impressed that more phones have not gone off, including my own. But there's so many ways now to get information. You can't just go to one newspaper or listen to one radio commentator or one TV person. You have to keep, it's like tentacles out in every direction saying, what's the news, what's the information that affects me and my family. It's a very exciting time. I'm kind of sad I'm at the end of my career because it's really a great way of learning information.
Are you done?
No.
I'll
send you a message.
Back to Sheila Bunn. I know Sheila Bunn, and she's a local Washingtonian. I knew her daddy, and he had a storefront on Martin Luther King Avenue in Congress Heights for ages and ages and ages. And he was involved in politics. He was one of John Wilson's kind of contacts in Ward 8. I would say, how many folks in this room are actually interested in politics in the practical aspect of actually being in a political situation? Raise your hands. So, if you have the interest and the time, try to get in touch with Sheila Bunn. She would love to have you work for her campaign, and that is a great way just to kind of, find out whether it's something you like to do. You might say, wow, this turns me on. And because Sheila is the real thing, she's put in her time. She's an alum, and she has a real chance of winning. So just in practical terms, I put that out there.
And is Brandon Todd?
Brandon Todd's a Trinity MBA. Yep.
Well, you know, he's been blessed by the current mayor for that Ward 4 seat, and he's raised more money. But you know, they can always use people to hold signs up in the morning to commute. It's just that you just get started. I got interested in civil rights because I was actually going to work one day, and some civil rights demonstrators went into a restaurant in Atlanta and were standing on the tables and in the chairs shouting about anti-segregation and all. And I thought, wow, this is pretty interesting. I didn't know anything about it. I was not even quite 18 years old. And it was just a moment where I was there. I said, wow, there's a lot going on that I didn't know. And so just by associating yourself with the Brandon Todd campaign or Sheila Fund or anyone else, you can just, maybe you don't know what you don't know. And so you have to allow yourself to have places where you can open your eyes and see things that you did not expect.
All right. Are there other questions here?
I do have to go in about...
You have to go in the end.
No one's asked us how much money Harry makes.
Okay, shout it out.
So,
Can you
Come up to the microphone, yeah. All right. Say your name. Very good.
so my name is Krista Gutierrez.
Talk to the mic.
Okay, so my name is Krista Gutierrez, and I'm a sophomore here. And my question is, I know that I have my question here.
Just say it from memory, we'll get it.
So my question was, as a leader, what will your recommendations be so that we can eradicate gentrification here in the city? And because I feel that low-income people's rights are being violated. So what will your recommendations be as a leader?
Well, I don't know that you're going to eradicate gentrification, but I can tell you in the 70s, when the city first got home rule government, it passed, the council members passed the toughest gun control law in the nation. It passed one of the toughest rent control laws in the nation, so that the people, owners of property, could not just simply throw tenants out into the street. And that rent control law exists still in some fashions, and I know that there was a condo conversion law which said that you could not take a building and convert it into condominiums without giving the people who live there as tenants the right to buy first right of refusal, it's called. And so there were organizations at the time, there still may be, to try to help people who have lower incomes band together and save their buildings. Less of that seems to be going on now. It seems to me that there is less political organization among middle and lower income people to fight for what they have. People who don't need housing aren't going to be your advocates. People have to get to organize themselves in their communities and fight for that at the council. The mayor said she's going to spend $100 million a year on making housing affordable. And people, if you're going to do that, that's where gentrification starts. Do you even live here to have a voice? And those who live here and feel threatened by gentrification need to speak up.
I have bad news and good news. The bad news is that there's no stopping gentrification. There's no government that can stop gentrification because a lot of gentrification has to do with the economy, has to do with the price of property, has to do with the demand for property. And so if you go up Georgia Avenue, around Lamont and Kenyon and just south of the metro, you're going to see a whole lot of vacant property. Well, that vacant property is going to get bought up and built up. Is that gentrification? Kind of, sort of, but those are vacant lots just sitting there. If somebody has the wherewithal to come in and buy a vacant corner on Georgia Avenue and put up an apartment building, is that gentrification? You're not throwing anybody out. You're giving people opportunity. So that's the bad news, is that gentrification is just going to march through this city. The only good news is that we have a new Attorney General. His name is Carl Racine. He was elected. He's the first elected Attorney General. And I think that there are laws on the books that protect the rights of people who live in some of the older buildings. And I don't think that those laws have been aggressively upheld and to protect the rights of some of the people in these buildings. They have to do with landlords kind of neglecting buildings and letting them run down and basically to force people out. Those laws have not been really enforced. Carl Racine says that he's going to do that. Let's see. I think the mayor can throw as much money as she wants into this and not do a damn thing. I think that the laws have to be enforced, some of those vacant lots all over the city have to be built up to house people who can afford to live there. And the facts are that there are buildings all over Washington, D.C. that have been subsidized for decades. They're mostly Section 8 housing, and those subsidies come to an end. And when they come to an end, the subsidized housing is going to be changed. And if there's a market for turning that subsidized building into higher rents or condominiums, it's going to happen unless the government steps in and buys the building or makes it so advantageous for someone to renovate it for affordable housing. Nothing is going to happen naturally. There is some government intervention that can be done, but gentrification is going to happen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question. Any other questions?
Any other questions?
There's one way in the back there.
Okay, one more.
Can you want to come up,
Shout it
please?
out. Oh, come on up here.
Come on up.
We need you to use a microphone. Why don't you use this microphone? Come up on stage. Stand right up here. Hey, everyone, you're good. Okay.
Like American Idol. Okay, see.
Say it in.
My name is Laura Espinosa, and I just want to know, like, what gave you all the confidence to write the book? Like, because it takes a lot to do that, to speak up and say something. I just want to know.
I never thought about writing a book. I'm the 6th-year freshman. Okay? I never thought. I was surprised with my southern accent I was even talking for a living. I'm aggressively interested in the nation's capital as a place. My son was born here, like Harry's daughters. My son has the DC flag tattooed on his arm. I asked him why he did that. He said it attracts girls.
To answer your question.
Oh, wait, look down to the short
You're
answer.
not done yet?
No, the short. Go ahead and finish.
I don't know. I don't know how Tom and I kind of endeavored to write this book. I mean, it is our business. We are both journalists, so we write on deadline. I had, Tom had written news articles for the Post. I had written magazine articles. I'd never written a book. So part of it is you just got to take a risk.
Let me ask you a question. Did the agent in New York call you, or were you talking to him in New York and this happened to come up? What was the genesis of the moment when this book started?
So I had a relationship with a literary agent. I mean, this is a business. We're in business. This isn't creative energy. We're in it to make a buck. I mean, that's how I raised my family. I'm a journalist. I write, they pay me. And so there's a trajectory in our business. You write for newspapers, you write for magazines, and maybe you keep going and you write a book, and then a movie when you really can get rich. Some of it is an act of faith. You have to think that you can actually perform and write a book, which is really hell on wheels. I mean, writing a book is hard work. Lonely, hard work. I didn't know that at the time.
Harry got a phone call from his agent in New York who said, Harry, this is a hell of a story. You want to write a book? I mean, that's how it started. Had he not made that phone call, that book would probably never exist.
He was actually having dinner at my house that weekend.
Oh,
Marion Barry was arrested Thursday night, and he was in my house on Friday. So it was luck. But publishers in New York did have an interest all of a sudden in the city and Marion Barry. But, you know, people take risks. We took a risk that we could report and write the book. The publisher took a risk and gave us a little bit of money that we could actually do it. And luckily we did. But you have to have, it's a leap of faith. Yeah. I mean, every time I confront that blank screen, it's kind of scary. It's never like, oh yeah, I can do this. It's like, oh my God, can I do this? So you're kind of left to live with it.
Thank you for your question.
So maybe you'll write a book.
Yeah.
Just sit down and start writing.
I didn't know I could before I did.
Right.
You all love to write. There are
Thank
many
you.
writers here. Thank you. Any other questions? One more? One final question? All right, one more from our first questioner.
Yes,
Come back
once
up.
in the microphone, I'm sorry.
Come back up.
You can tilt it up to your mouth. Tilt it
Pull it
up so you can...
Speak into it like
These
you're on
are
American
called
Idol.
directional microphones. You have to speak directly into it, because otherwise you don't hear the person speaking unless you speak directly into it. That's called a directional microphone.
Okay, well, I just want to know if I can have a signed copy of the book.
Have you bought it?
No.
Well, we'll negotiate that later. Did you just hear Harry talking about we're in this to make money?
All right.
Okay.
Well,
Madam
listen,
President, thank you.
we could go on, but this has been fabulous. Do you have some wrap-up thoughts for us? As we wrap up, let me ask both of you to comment on the future of home rule. Is it going to get better or worse? And what can we look forward to in the Bowser administration? In 2 minutes or less.
Well, the short answer is Congress doesn't care about us. The fact is the people who have the power, who need to get something done in Congress, they have the power, they can go directly to Congress. They don't need a voting member of the House or the Senate.
I'm optimistic about home rule. And the reason I'm optimistic is that I think that we have competent government, and I think that Muriel Bowser, I don't think she's going to be crooked. And I'm not so sure that anybody in the...
It's not a question of whether or not people are good or bad.
Can I finish?
No, 4 governors of Illinois have gone to prison.
Can I finish?
No one's taken away their voting rights.
Can I finish?
The governor of Oregon has resigned. No one's taken their voting rights away. The mayor of New Orleans is in a 10-year prison sentence. No one's taken their voting rights away. It's not up to that.
Okay. So,
If we all behave and we all wear socks with our shoes, we'll get voting rights. Hell no.
okay. The practical matter is, as Tom was saying, although it was incomprehensible, Congress, well, it was your demeanor. Congress does control ultimately by the Constitution, what goes on in Washington D.C. But I think that there could be an incremental increase in home rule because Congress does react to competence. Congress does react to people who, run the budget, run the city, and I think that's going to happen. I think that Carl Racine is looks good, sounds good, talks good. I think that he will give Congressman the Senate more, confidence, which they have to have, unfortunately. I mean, I'm not happy about the situation, but you got to deal with reality. The reality is that, during the Marion Barry era, Congress was not in the mood to necessarily, bestow more rights on Washington, D.C. Is it unjust? Yes. But the reality is that Congress can incrementally increase home rule, and I think that could very well happen, even with a Republican-controlled Congress. As far as Mayor Bowser goes, I think that she is going to be competent, incremental, no kind of broad, taking over the schools, opening up various parts of the city. I think that she is starting off kind of in a slow, methodical way, and I think that's how she was as a council member. I think a lot of it depends on who she surrounds herself with. Her pitfalls are in how she deals with bestowing contracts on some of the folks who were developers during Adrian Fenty's era. people like Sherwood and myself will be watching to see how that comes down. But I think that we have a new city council. We're not quite sure how that's going to function. The relationship between Mendelson, the city council chairman, and the mayor is yet to be worked out. So it's an unfolding story.
We don't have another hour. I'm not interested in incremental rights. It doesn't say incremental rights anywhere to me. I just find that if Muriel Bowser is nice, if she's go along, get along, if she makes incremental progress, I find that.
I said if she's competent.
And competent, even then, who cares if she's competent? She's an American citizen.
People who run Washington, D.C., the people in Congress. Yeah, well, that's a fact.
Yes, but it's the fact that we don't have to accept. We have to challenge that. Who's seen the movie Selma?
All right, how many times?
So the president says, Dr. King, we're not ready for voting rights yet. We've just done this massive civil rights thing. You can go in hotels and you can go in public accommodation. We're making progress.
That never happened, by the way. Those conversations between LBJ and Martin Luther King never happened.
But there was an effort by the Johnson administration to slow them down on the voting rights thing. And guess what?
So how many times have politicians in Washington, D.C. been arrested because they are pissed off about home rule?
There's that word again.
Many times. Has it actually done anything?
That's not that's a mistaken plan.
I'm interested in what actually happens.
Congress wants us to change our gun law so everybody can have a gun. I think what the city should do, if I were the mayor, I would open a gun shop right there on Capitol Hill. And it'd be the only one in the city, and I'd have a big arrow shaped like a shotgun with neon, and be blasting out the end. Come buy your guns here. And then for all the tourists to go to the Congress, which is locked up like a fortress, I would make sure every tourist young person had a look-alike toy gun, so she could carry it into the halls of Congress and confiscate them by the thousands, because they want us to have guns. I mean, there are things you can do that are creative to challenge the constitutional power of Congress to treat us like a plantation. You can do that. People, let's recall women here who, you can't vote. Let's just go back. The Constitution doesn't work. African Americans, 3/5 human. Incremental is not the word when you're talking about your rights. I'm sorry, this is a little different question.
Okay, I think we're at 11 past 11:30 at this point. Shelley, you are just bursting. Shelley's bursting.
But you have to get to the microphone.
Come on.
Good? How's that?
That's better.
No one here has mentioned statehood. Okay? There are those who believe that until we are the 51st state, none of this is going to happen. I know. Yeah. There is a movement that didn't exist 8 years ago that is slowly gathering steam. You'll notice the mayor wears a little hat now, statehood, and the president has given lip service. So anyone just apply the word?
Statehood is an achievable thing, it's possible, but I'm not here to advocate.
It's not going to happen.
We'll go. Maybe when we get more competent people in town. All the students are leaving. Thank you for coming.
The students have class. They're racing in class.
Okay.
It's class change time.
I have to go.
Let's thank Tom Sherwood.
I want to thank you all for being here.
And her students for bringing me and sitting here.